Hey everybody, Andrew here from the Revisionist Almanac. It's almost time to return to Pandora and the land of the blue creatures because the latest James Cameron film, Avatar Fire and Ash, releases this week. This felt like a great time to revisit the career of one of our most prominent, bankable filmmakers ahead of what I'm sure will be another movie that makes billions of dollars. Yes, that's billions with a B. Let's look back on his past work and we'll rank them from my least favorite up to the one that I enjoy the most. We are also not going to include 1982's Piranha 2 The Spawning, and we're only going to talk about his 8 primary feature films. At number 8, we have his most recent film, that is Avatar The Way of Water from 2022. This is not me sitting here and trying to sound like an Avatar hater. I actually think the movies are technical marvels. They're spectacles of the highest order, even if I don't have any urge to see them in the theater myself. While I have grown an appreciation for the original Avatar over time, the sequel just doesn't do anything for me on a plot level. It looks beautiful, so many pretty shades of blue, but if I just want to watch a movie with great imagery, I would go a number of other directions before I ended up with a desire to hit play on this film. And from one movie set in the water to the other in his filmography, let's talk about 1989's The Abyss at number 7. While I have an appreciation for this movie, which looks fantastic for the late 80s and features a much more intriguing story than Way of Water, I didn't grow up on this film or watch it with regularity in my teens, so my emotional attachment is minimal at best. I think Ed Harris does give a fantastic lead performance, but the rest of the supporting cast just isn't pulling enough weight to keep this movie afloat. Now we get to the very first film ever with a $100 million budget. At number 6, I have 1994's True Lies. This action comedy starring Arnold Schwarzenegger was one I remember seeing at a relatively young age on a VHS Blockbuster rental. I had a really good time with it then, and I've continued going back to it every few years through my adulthood, most recently watching it in 2024 while I was doing an Almanac episode on the 94 film year. There's not much to say about this movie other than it's just a damn good time. Arnold is still at the height of his power. Plus, we get some sublime character actors like Jamie Lee Curtis, who has quite the memorable scene, Bill Paxton, Tia Carrere, and Tom Arnold, a true 90s celebrity if there ever was one. I'm not so sure how this movie holds up for someone younger than me that would be watching it for the first time, but I still have nostalgia brain whenever I fire this film back up. Now we're going to get to the movie I've had the most interesting relationship with in the James Cameron catalog. It's 2009's Avatar at number 5. When this movie came out, I was at the time working in the restaurant industry. I was pulling 12 or 14-hour days. I never had a weekend off. I never had a holiday off. And movies were just something I had less time for. I had to be super selective with what I carved out my time for. And also the group of coworkers I had ranged in age, background, and more importantly, movie interest. I say that because I distinctly remember Avatar releasing and several of my coworkers telling me this was the single greatest film ever made. Then they proceeded to go back and see it over and over and over. It was no surprise to me it made so much money at the time. But because of this, I had a natural resistance to the film after such bold claims were made. I actively avoided it for years until the hype finally died down. Once that moment did pass, I found the time to watch it at home, and I thought it was a good but dramatically far from great movie that was all the hyperbole I had heard prior. Again, I put it on the shelf and I moved on with my life, not expecting another Avatar movie to come out. By the time we started hearing about The Way of Water, my oldest kid at the time was at an age where I felt like I could watch it with him on Disney+. Naturally, he got very bored with the movie quickly. 3 years old is just not the most conducive age to digest what's happening in this film. However, I walked away from the revisit getting much more immersed in the film as a 30-something-year-old than I was in my 20s. I'd say I'm now at the point where I'm okay with Avatar being called a great movie. However, any discussion of the best movies ever can be totally carried on without papyrus font ever being mentioned. Let's now get to what was probably the very first James Cameron movie I saw, 1997's Titanic at number 4. So I was 12 years old when this movie came out. I didn't see it in the theater, but I very much remember the cultural phenomenon the movie was, Celine Dion epic song and all. It was really once it hit VHS, those infamous double VHS tapes that I eventually got around to watching the film. For this 13-year-old boy, the movie just wasn't something I was into at the time. I didn't care about the love story, and I had no historical attachment to the events of the ship actually sinking. So I didn't make a habit of going back to it through my late teens and into my 20s, but once I reached my 30s, I decided I should really take the time to reevaluate the film as an adult, and I'm so glad I did. I was mature enough finally to truly appreciate the craftsmanship behind making it. The size, the scope, the ambition of this film all off the charts. Now, I'll be covering 1997 over the summer for an Almanac episode, and I'm going to guard some of my thoughts about this movie in the context of the full year, just to keep you guessing. But I do think Titanic is a great, great movie that stands as one of the most epic films of the 90s decade. We now get to Cameron's first true actual feature film, 1984's The Terminator, at number 3 on my list. This was a movie that came out a year before I was born, so by the time I had reached an age where I could see it, I was well aware of the movie and its sequel, which we'll get to, but it was part of the fabric of society at that point in time. What blew me away once I did see the movie, though, was how dark and horrific the film was at its fundamental core. And also, even though it was a very high-concept science fiction spectacle, Cameron pulled off a miracle in creating it, given the relatively modest budget, especially when you compare his budgets in his later films. Just like The Terminator being something I was so familiar with before seeing the movie, I was equally aware of Arnold Schwarzenegger, having seen him in kids' fare like Jingle All the Way and Kindergarten Cop before I ever did get to this film. So watching this movie after he had already reached the top of the superstar mountain, it was all the more apparent how he got there and why he deserved it. It's a muscular performance dripping with cold, calculated menace. We now get to the top 2 movies and 2 franchise sequels, but let's start with the one Cameron took over from someone else. At number 2, it's Aliens from 1986. Ridley Scott's original 1979 film redefined the horror genre, and it continues to hold a place in the world of cinema with an unrivaled legacy as god-tier science fiction masterpiece. The idea that anyone would dare to come along and make a sequel to that film just 7 years later seems ridiculous in hindsight. And yet, even more ballsy was to not bother replicating the tone and dread of that film, but change the entire genre into something significantly more action-packed, yet still retaining all the incredible world building of the first. Aliens is bigger, it's badder, it's meaner, and it has Sigourney Weaver solidifying herself as one of the most powerful female protagonists of the 80s, maybe in all of cinema history. This movie is still so alive, and it's one of the very, very rare sequels to get made that's on equal footing with the movie that came before it. It's a remarkable piece of work. And now to my top spot, something that should surprise absolutely nobody. It is Terminator 2: Judgment Day from 1991. For my money, this is the second greatest action movie ever made, only being surpassed by George Miller's Mad Max Fury Road, but the margin is razor thin. In the recent Cinema Legacy poll I helped with for the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, this film was on my own personal list of the 50 best movies of all time. I think it's that great and it is that important. I also consider it the best film of the year it came out. Apologies to 1991's Best Picture winning The Silence of the Lambs. If you would like to hear much more of my thoughts on T2 and my arguments for why I think it deserved more Oscars love that year, you can go back several months on this channel to find the full 91 Almanac episode I did with Liz Arnold and Scott Cole. I'm also going to have that episode linked in the show notes here. T2 is the perfect James Cameron film. The film I think he should be most remembered for, even if he's won Best Picture with Titanic, and even if he's made his last 15 to 20 years of work all about the Avatar franchise. You just don't get any better than Linda Hamilton being a badass and Arnold turning the tables, playing a reprogrammed good Terminator, protecting John Connor and the human race. But now's the time where I want to hear from you. So what does your James Cameron ranking look like? Do me a favor, DM me on any of the social media platforms, the handle's RevAlmanac, or email into the show directly at revisionistalmanac@yahoo.com. Leave me your thoughts. And of course, once I see Avatar: Fire and Ash, I'll review that during one of my monthly watch recap episodes, as well as letting you know where it ranks inside the full list of James Cameron films. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me for a little bit. I'm Andrew. Can't wait to see you next time.